And we're live. Hey guys, welcome to The Trade, episode 58. Yes, 58. I question myself. My co-host today is Jake Richmond of Modest Medusa. Jake, thank you for coming.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
As we're getting rolling here, I don't think I mentioned my name. I'm Melony. Man, today is one of those days, those hot days. Ugh, it is boiling here. I've got fans going on. It's I got ice packs. It's crazy. But our subject for discussion today, because I really wanted to discuss this, and we've been kind of kicking this around for almost a month now, and this has been brought up over the past couple of years and only brought to my attention recently, was the debate over the business model of the independent webcomic industry. I've got one main article here, and I'll put links down in the doobly-doo from Webcomics Alliance. The article is from 2012. Dawn Griffin wrote it, and that's when she was still doing her webcomic. Was it Zoff, Bert, and Fred? And she openly talked about this debate about how the most successful webcomics just give away all their content for free and then make their money on the back end episodically, kind of like you do with a lot of cartoons and episodic television stuff on the merchandise side of things, on the books and the t-shirts and all the spin-off material. That's where you actually make your money with a little bit of advertising on the side. And she's actually proposing to ditch that model because it's not helping anybody. The only people that are making any type of decent living at it is the most popular, and everybody else below that is just basically more or less getting crumbs. The best way to put it.
I think, if I can add something right there, I think it's not even that it's necessarily the most popular people who are making that work for them. It's the people who are just the best suited for that. Like, I think Dawn made a good case that you can have a work that is actually really popular and really interesting and really has an audience, but that audience might not want to give you money for t-shirts that are only kind of related to what you're doing, or, you know, cheap merchandise that nobody really wants anyway. Right. Yeah, so it's a model that's just not well suited for a lot of people and their fans.
Yeah, that's definitely a good point.
Yeah. And I wanted to point that out because I brought this up with a few people recently, and the response was always, well, you know, the really popular people can make it work. And I think that's not true. I think there's a lot of really popular webcomics where that just doesn't actually work at all. And there's a lot of, you know, and there's several less popular webcomics, still popular, but not like with tons and tons of viewers, that have found some success there. So I think it's more of a model thing. That suits some people and not everybody, than just pure popularity.
Yeah, it could be that, or it could be the fact that I think we need to help our audience understand that we're creators, we're people too. We need to make a living at this. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And what we're making is we love what we make, and we want to share our stories. But at the same time, we need to be able to get paid for it, you know, in some way. And what she proposes on here is a pretty good idea. I'm going to just run down the basics here. The main rules of the webcomic business. If you're kind of serious about it, she listed 5 key rules that are pretty much the consistent idea behind the current webcomics model. And is number 1, be consistent and stick to your schedule. Try to never miss an update if possible. Number 2, more updates, more deadlines, more blog posts. If you're sleeping, you're a slacker. 5 days a week or you're not serious. Number 3, be a social media whore. Promote, promote, promote. Number 4, guest comics, fan art, share others' work, comment on their sites. You have to give back to and really participate in the community. 5, Find, join, or create a collective, a network. Start doing Comic Cons. And she followed this pretty faithfully. She started her webcomic back in 2006. And initially she said in the article here that she didn't intend it to even be a webcomic. But she got into it, making it a webcomic. And it gained a certain amount of following. It was a pretty steady following. But that following plateaus at a certain level that you can't get any more readers at. And it's not maybe the key demographic you're aiming for. I mean, there's always those factors. Quite a bit of which is just out of your hands.
Oh yeah, no, I mean, and that's, yes, that is a really good description of the process that I was sold on, and I think most of us were sold on. The example that was offered and said, if you follow these steps, you are not guaranteed at all to have a successful webcomic, but these are the steps you need to follow to have a successful webcomic. And I think, you know, for whatever reason, more and more of us are learning that that's just not true. That may have worked at one time, that may have worked for certain people, but it's not a process that's going to work for everybody, of course. And but it's also not a process that really even works for a lot of people. It really seems like that's a process that worked really well for the few people it worked for, and everybody else has been trying to duplicate that, and it's just no guarantee at all. It's we need to find other ways, and Dawn was all over this idea, like you said, 5 years ago, which was around the time I started making webcomics. So I feel like I'm coming to this idea really late in the game, but I think she's right. I think looking for ways that suit you as a creator, that suit your audience, for your audience to support you, for you to provide content for your audience, and not just relying on giving away all your work for free and hoping people decide to give you money, I think is really smart.
Well, I liked some of her idea here. She proposed, at least for her webcomic at the time, she proposed a new business model, and so she came up with a new 5 ways to do things. And since I'm a friend on Facebook, and I did talk to her briefly about it. And she has stopped doing webcomics now. She's gone strictly to books. I'm doing mostly children's books now, but still books in general. And she does comics too, but it's all book form. She barely, she has an online presence, of course. She's still very active online, but she stopped doing the webcomic idea because in 6 to 7 years of doing the webcomic, she had such a low amount of success with it compared to going to cons, book festivals, arts and crafts fairs, and doing a lot of things like that. She had more success with
that doesn't surprise me. Yeah, that doesn't surprise me at all. I often tell people that, you know, I'll do a Kickstarter and I'll print, you know, 1,000 books or 2,000 books. And, you know, I'll sell a lot of those through my Kickstarter, but then people will assume that then what happens is for months and months and for a year after that, like every month I'm getting orders for like, you know, a bunch of copies. People are ordering them through my website, or they're going to distributors. And that's just not true. Mostly, you know, most months I have 1 or 2 or 3 or 5 people order books through my online store, but most of my sales are going to be at conventions. Most of the time, that's me going to conventions around the Pacific Northwest, or sometimes just down in California, you know, and getting that table and sitting there and meeting new people and talking to new people and converting people into readers and getting them to read my books. So most of my sales and therefore most of my income from the comic, from selling books, comes solely from those conventions. And as far as those people at those conventions are concerned who are buying my stuff, most of the time they've never read my comic online. Most of the time they're completely unaware of it. That's their first exposure to it. So all that work I'm doing, updating my comic every week, all that, or 3 times a week, all that social media work I'm doing every single day, everything I'm doing to follow that classic path that's been laid out for us is largely not actually helping me create book sales.
Not like it used to anyways. And I consider you at least on the upper end of the success scale.
Yeah, I mean, I've been pretty fortunate, and I have a lot of things that have gone really well for me. I think So this classic model of, you know, you do your updates every week, what you were describing before, and what we were all told, I do think it has its benefits. And for me, one of the benefits was that it gave me a path to follow. So I could start out doing Modest Medusa and doing, you know, 3 strips a week and putting the strips up and talking about them on social media and building an audience. And that did let me build an audience, and that did let me find an audience and find a readership and find loyal fans, so that when I did my Kickstarter, I had people that wanted to support it, that wanted to actually buy my book. And so I do think that was important. And if I hadn't done that, I'm not entirely sure how my audience would have built. But I feel like I've gotten to the point, and I got to the point a few years ago, where the webcomic itself, putting the work up every 3 times a week, wasn't generating income by itself. It was just letting me create the raw material so I could do Kickstarters, and the Kickstarters are where my income came from.
Right.
So then, you know, I started asking the question, maybe I can just do the Kickstarters. Maybe I don't have to update 3 times a week. How important is that update, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah. And I often wonder about it too, because then I'll have years where, for whatever reason, I can't do a new Kickstarter and I can't put a book out. For example, I released my 3rd Modest Medusa book about 3 years ago, and I haven't done a new one since then. And so those have been really lean years for me. And I started questioning, how am I going to bring in income on years where I'm not actually releasing a new book for people to buy and going to conventions with that book. So I've been very interested in finding new models to follow, new ways to generate income.
And well, like what she suggested, at least with her comic, was she fully admits, okay, maybe it wasn't just great for being a webcomic. You know, she's not saying her work was bad. But, you know, she gives various good reasons in this article here about, you know, maybe I'm just not very good at this. You know, I'm still learning. I'm still growing. Maybe the market is too oversaturated. Maybe I didn't follow the rules to the T well enough. Maybe I'm just unlucky. I mean, you know. Or maybe Z and F is a worthwhile comic, just not as a web comic. And
yeah,
you know, and those are all definitely factors you got to take in with this, because this is a business, and unfortunately there are just some things that work with one model that do not work with another. I think Modest works very well online wise, but I do think that the idea of putting up a paywall might be a better idea.
Yeah, well, one of the things I've been doing, I've been talking to friends a lot. I've been talking to my readers a lot and my Patreon supporters. And I've been trying to get a feel of what they want to see and what would be acceptable for me to do. And I've come up with a few ideas. I feel like producing Modest Medusa 3 times a week and posting it 3 times a week has been an important part of my strip success. And also because it allows me to, it keeps me on a schedule and keeps me producing the comic at a regular basis, which allows me to put books out more often. I feel like that's really important, and I don't want to abandon that. But at the same time, I'm learning that, you know, I'm not making money advertising on my generating advertising on my website. A lot of comics do that. That's how they make their money. That's not working for me. It's never worked well for me. I'm not making money largely on book sales, at least off the website. I do well selling books at conventions, but just selling them on my site, that's not really working. I'm not selling t-shirts. I'm not selling prints. All of those things that are traditional money makers for webcomics or that are supposed to work for us are not working for me. And you know what I found out is that mostly those things don't work for most of us. You know, I have friends who do okay with t-shirts. I have friends who do okay with prints. I have friends who do okay with advertising, but none of them do well enough that that's a major source of income for them. Right. So putting all that aside, I've decided that what is a major source of income for me is running Kickstarters where I can produce a new book and then bringing those books to conventions. So I want to focus on that. I want to encourage my readers to buy my books. I don't necessarily want to put up a paywall that keeps anybody from reading the comic for free. But in my case, what I'm exploring is other halfway options. For example, posting my comics with a delay, where if you're a Patreon reader, you get the comics as I post them 3 days a week. But if you're not a Patreon reader, those new comics don't make it to my website until a month later, or 2 months later, or possibly at the end of the season, or possibly just a week later. I haven't decided what a good delay is. So that way you can read the comic online and you can enjoy it online, but when you get to the end of it, there'll be a little thing that tells you if you want to read more, there's more you can read right now if you want to sign up for the Patreon. If not, you can wait for the book to come out, or you can just wait a few weeks or a few months for the updates to come along.
Right.
And I don't know if that's the solution, but it's something I'm thinking about right now, and it's something that I'm hoping would encourage people to contribute to my Patreon, which is the other half of my major source of income, or it would encourage people to buy my books or support my books through Patreon or through Kickstarters when the time comes. And I think that might be a good model for me. I think that might be the way I end up going. I also think that's not a good model for everybody, but I think it's important that we start realizing that, what works for one of us is not necessarily going to work for all of us. And we can't just all stick to the same model. We have to, or for example, there's a few really good books on making webcomics and publishing webcomics, and there's countless really good articles on them. And a friend of mine was asking me, like, what's the best article to look at or what's the best book to read if I want to learn how to make webcomics? And what he meant was if I want to learn how to make money making webcomics and be successful making webcomics. And the answer is there is actually no. There's a lot of books and a lot of articles that have great ideas, but there's no real perfect guide, because how it's turning out is we all have to take really different paths to get where we want to be. We have to kind of customize our path for our audience and for the kind of work we do and for the kind of work schedule we want to have.
Yeah. I think our economy has something to do with that. But being part of the younger generation here that's in on the business idea of using the internet as a business tool, I think that has a big influence on us being more flexible with our business models and with our time structure too.
Mm-hmm.
And getting set up and rigid in just doing one way and one way only, putting all your eggs in that basket just doesn't work anymore. All of us have, learned that the hard way.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, that's totally true. You can't just do one thing and hope it works. I think you have to really try a bunch of different things. When I got started out, I was pretty convinced that if I just did this one specific thing, if I just posted on this one site, the first webcomic I did, which was a few years before Modest Medusa, I was convinced if I just put it up once a week and if I just posted about it on my live journal, I would find an audience and it would all work out. And that was just totally untrue. And with Modest Medusa, I learned I had to try a bunch of different things. I had to do a bunch of different things. I had to try a bunch of different methods. If there was a path I could go down, I had to go down it as far as I could until it ended up being obviously not profitable and not worth my time. And the downside of that is we don't all have a lot of time to dedicate to our webcomics. I mean, for a lot of us have full-time jobs or part-time jobs or families or other interests or whatever. So our comic is something we do on the side sometimes. I'm in a lucky position where I don't really have that. I mean, I spend all my time working on my comics, but not everybody's that lucky. But it takes a lot of time. I mean, you can spend, 10 hours working on a page and then spend another 10 or 15 hours trying to find places to promote it, trying to explore new options, learning how different sites work, learning how different promotional tools work, sending stuff to people and never hearing responses, answering responses online. It can be a huge undertaking. It's not always. Some weeks with Modest Medusa, I spend 20 or 30 hours doing promotional work, and some weeks I spend no time at all. So it varies, but it's a huge time investment. But I think that's also important. I mean, I think for most of us, we have to make that time investment because we're usually not going to be lucky enough to just fall into something that works for us. We're not going to fall into the perfect promotional vehicle, or we're not going to get super lucky and have the right person talk about our comic in the right place where thousands and thousands of people see it. We have to make that luck for ourselves.
Yeah, definitely. You know, I think keeping a schedule of some type of creating is very good. I mean, we as creative people in general kind of need that structure. At least I found just about every creator of any sort needs that type of structure.
Oh, yeah.
Even around a day job and whatnot, because, you know, I'm full-time at my day job right now. I wish I wasn't, but I am. You know, it is what it is. I work with it. And but like what she proposes with her webcomic, at least at the time when she when this article was written, she said pretty much screw page views. Don't worry about that shit. That's garbage, basically. It's not going to do you any good. She gave up on doing the 3 to 5 days a week updates because they weren't bringing anything new to the table.
Yeah.
At least for her webcomic. And again, I want everybody to keep this in context. This was just for her. This is what happened with hers. She had a better overall performance with the books. Maybe I'm thinking that ZNF was better as a book comic, you know, where you got enough chunk of the story at a time.
Yeah.
That attracted more readers. So the 3 to 5 updates a week just don't work, at least for her. And so she focused on the bigger project, which is the full book, than so much putting up 3 to 5 a week constantly. You know, she still made more than likely 3 to 5, but she probably only put 1 or 2 up per week and just had that backlog.
Yeah, I think having a regular schedule is really important for a lot of us, in that it keeps us, you know, producing our comics on a regular basis. I know for myself, it's so easy. It's always been so easy to, you know, be on schedule and be producing 3 strips a week. And then all of a sudden I hit a snag and something like that happens and I'm not producing anything. And then 2 or 3 weeks have gone by, a month has gone by, nothing's getting produced. And then the comic's over. And that's an easy trap to fall into. But I think something that Don pointed out is or if we follow Don's example, it's really easy to remember that keeping a production schedule doesn't necessarily mean you have to be posting that work. And I mean, posting the work is a great incentive to keep drawing. Getting feedback from your readers, having people see it and appreciate it is a great incentive. But you don't have to post it. You can produce, you know, a strip every week, but only post a strip a month, or you can produce 3 strips a week, but only post 1 a week. The method she was talking about in one of her articles, where she was posting in seasons, where she would post for, I don't remember exactly what it was, but it sounded like she would post for like 2 or 3 months, and then she would take 2 or 3 months off, and then she would post again for 2 or 3 months and take 2 or 3 months off. I thought that was really interesting. And I don't know if I fully understood what she was doing there, but what it sounded to me like she was doing is she was referring to those as her seasons, is she would produce a season worth of work, and during her off time, and then when the season was on, she would post some of that and tell people, if you want to read the rest of it, here it is for sale. And that sounded really compelling to me. That sounded like a really interesting model. And I don't know how successful that was for her, but it sounds like something that could be successful.
Yeah, definitely.
I think.
Well, like I said, she focused more on making books, at least out of her comic at the time, because she found trying to gain any more readership online just didn't seem to work. Once it hit that plateau, that was it, you know.
Sure, yeah.
And so with her work, I definitely could see that with that comic itself. With yours, I think, a delay for at least like 2 weeks.
Sure.
A 2-week delay per, you know, so you're posting, you know, you're still making 3 a week, but you're only posting 1, and then, you know, giving the next one a 2-week, you know.
Yeah. Yeah, no, in my case, the two things that I'm interested in, the two questions I'm interested in is, well, it seems like the two ways I'm going to make money is through my Patreon and through doing Kickstarters to produce new books and then selling those books at conventions. So the questions I need to ask myself is, one, how do I convince readers to contribute to my Patreon? How do I make that worthwhile and appealing for them? And then as a separate question, for possibly a completely separate group of readers, is how do I produce enough work to do a new Kickstarter for a new book about once a year and convince people to support that book and make that worthwhile to them so that I can sell it to them, but I can also then bring it to conventions and sell it there. Right. And yeah, and I think I haven't cemented a model for doing that yet, but I feel good about being able to isolate those options. I feel good about being able to knowing now that those are what I want to focus on. And I think that's something that's important for all of us. We need to identify what's going to actually work for us, how our customers want to buy our books or give us money, and how we can make that worthwhile to them.
Definitely.
Yeah.
You know, and it really depends upon the type of comic you're making too, you know. Mm-hmm. I found slice of life ones lately are the big popular ones because everybody can relate to them.
Sure.
There's a couple like Sarah Sanders does her webcomic, and then there's Adam Totes, he does his, and they get a lot of hits on both Facebook, Twitter, and occasionally hit up there on BuzzFeed and the like. So they get a lot of exposure for theirs, but theirs are all slice of life.
Right.
Real relatable. So, and I see Sarah making about one book a year, and they're small books. They're not very big books. Mm-hmm. I've got one of hers here, Sarah Scribbles, and it's not terribly big. So I could definitely see you may be paring things down and doing just smaller books.
I think that's always an option. I think one of the Sarah's comic is great, by the way. I think one of the strengths she has, I'm looking at her webtoon page right now, by the way. One of the strengths she has is not just that it's slice of life, but it's also completely self-contained. So you can really click on any strip she does, and you're going to get, 3 to 10 panels that's a self-contained story. And you don't need to read any more than that, which makes it really easy to share on Facebook or Twitter or whatever. And it really makes it really easy for people to engage with it without having to know any more than that. You can read one of her comics and never read any more, but then when you see another one, you'll, like online a few months later, you'll say, hey, I know that, I read that once, and you feel a sense of connection. I love doing more long-form comics. I mean, Modest Medusa started off as a gag comic, but it's always had an ongoing story, and it's become more of an adventure comic as it went on. But one of the downsides of that, of course, is that it's harder for people to jump into the middle of it. Right. It's harder for people to just pick up in any of the books and know what's going on and feel like they can get into it. People have to start at the beginning, and that's always been a downside to making to being more accessible and easier to read.
Yeah, see, it just really depends upon that format. Sarah's are fantastic, and like you said, they're self-contained, slice of life. You can jump in anywhere with more episodic stuff and more longer form, story form. Yeah, it's a lot harder to get people in. You can't always hop in the middle, and. Yeah. So, that's definitely one of those things you got to take into consideration. Now, with the longer form ones, if you're thinking about launching one, let's say you haven't launched one yet. Let's say you don't have a readership yet. What I think you should do is do 20 strips, pages, whatever you're going to do, whatever boxing, basically, however your panel setup is going to be. Have about at least half of that. Have at least 20 made, then take about 10 of those, put them up for free, and then delay the rest out,
Sure.
and then just promote the shit out of those first 10, so that way you can catch people in if you're going to do that longer format.
Right.
And then you can also then direct them to your Patreon, and that way then they could get, you know, ahead in the story if they wanted to. You could also mention that you want to do a book, and then they could get in on your Kickstarters early as well. Overall, I think that's a very good idea right there. With a shorter form, and these episodic slice of life or something along those lines, where you can jump in pretty much at any point, that are very easy to share. The webcomics model, I think, actually works a little better for them. But I see Sarah only posting them maybe once a week.
Yeah. Well, I think also, I mean, something that when you're doing these shorter form things, these single standalone strips, something that you have a really nice opportunity to do is sort of what you were just describing, where you can present, you know, this small archive of strips, 10 strips, 20 strips, whatever you're comfortable with, and have everything else behind a paywall. And just, you know, periodically, whenever you feel like it, you can release something from the paywall into the wild where everybody else can see it. And people who are interested, people who come across your one strip on Facebook or on Instagram or whatever that's being passed around, they can say, oh, okay, well, if I want to get more of these, I can go to her site, or I can go to her Webtoon page or whatever, where there's more of these. But eventually I'm going to read through the small archive of 10 or 20 or 30 that are there. And then there's a big thing that says, if you want to see more, it's all on Patreon. If you want to see more, it's all in this book. And I think that has the potential to work really well.
Yeah, well, as we all know, especially since the economic crash back in 2008 here, advertising has gone way down overall. A lot of things have kind of gone down and leveled out at a far lower expectation level and have not risen at all.
Right.
So a lot of people are struggling, and I get that. And that's why I still say we make, but that delay or that full paywall of at least a Patreon paywall at the very least helps us be able to still create for people and still be able to get something back in return, since we're no longer making hardly anything at all, if at all, on advertising or much in the way of merchandise, unless you're a big time guy like Awkward Yeti. He does his webcomic or the Oatmeal.
Sure.
I know they have a lot of merchandise, a lot of like stuffed animals and things like that.
Right.
Stuffed toys of their characters, and they wouldn't be doing that if they weren't making something off of them.
Yeah.
So
yeah. No, that's totally true.
Yeah, they've got a much larger following though, that they've built over the past several years. But again, I've also seen them do very relatable slice of life comics with theirs, and you can jump in at any point with theirs.
Right. So something you just said, that, I mean, comics like the Oatmeal and other comics, they have huge readerships. There's so many people reading them. And often I'll talk about how I feel like I don't make enough money and I'm always struggling, and people will say, yeah, but your readership isn't very big, so, you know, why do you expect that to support you? And what I always think is, well, how big does your readership have to be? You know, is 5,000 people enough? Is 10,000 people enough? Is 20,000 people enough? Because is you know, 500 people enough? I mean, there's probably not a magic number, but at some point, there's a lot of people out there reading your stuff, and you feel like you shouldn't be doing this for free, that you shouldn't just be putting this out in the world and letting people gobble it up. I do feel like we have a right to income here. I do feel like it is. I think a lot of people, both readers and also some people who make webcomics, feel like it's inappropriate to ask for money, or it's inappropriate to want to be paid for what we're doing. And because of that, there's kind of a stigma around it, I think. That came up.
Yeah, yeah. No, I've heard that. I've heard that argument as well. And I looked at him, I'm like, I am a content creator. I'm a creative entrepreneur. It doesn't matter what I am making. I am putting it out there. I expect some type of compensation out of it.
Right. When I was talking about this on Facebook and G Plus a few weeks ago, I think you saw this. I was asking my readers, you know, at what point would you pay for this content? I mean, would you pay $1 a month? Which, you know, which is what I ask for people on Patreon. Would you sign up for a subscription? Would you be willing to support Patreon? Would you buy this in book form? And, you know, and a lot of the readers were really, really, really positive. And a lot of readers said, yeah. And a lot of readers said, that's not really how I want to consume this content. That's not how I want to pay for it. I want to pay for it in different ways. But I was kind of surprised by the number of people who were just flat out, no, absolutely not. I would not pay for webcomics. Webcomics are not real products. They're supposed to be free. There's no reason I should pay for them. You should be creating them just because and just for fun with no expectation that you're going to make any money. And that was kind of amazing to me.
I think that especially the younger generations that are coming up after us, they're better set up to understand about paywalls. You know,
Yeah.
The apps, for instance, through the app stores, iTunes, Android apps, and whatnot, has helped break them into that idea of there is at least a minimal paywall to these different things. And I found younger readers don't mind paying. It's the older ones who are used to getting some type of free content.
No,
but
I
the
think
problem,
you're right.
I think we have to help reprogram people to understand I'm a human being and I need paid for my shit.
Yeah.
I make it. I want to share it with you, but you know, it's a give and take here. You want some entertainment? I would love to give you some entertainment. I am making entertainment. Give me $1.
Yeah, give me $1, and give me $1 because if you don't do that, this isn't a threat, but if you don't do that, the comic might go away. I can only afford to keep doing this with your financial support, and that burden doesn't have to be entirely on you. We can split that 1,000 ways, but it has to come from somewhere. Exactly. Yeah. What you said early on was that we need to find a way to make it clear to our readers that we do need this support. That it doesn't particularly matter where the money comes from, but there does have to be money. There does have to be a way for us to actually pay our bills so we can afford to do this. Almost everybody I know who makes webcomics is, you know, dirt poor. I mean, nobody's making a lot of money off it. And the people I know who do make, you know, decent money, who make webcomics, that money doesn't come from the webcomics. It comes from other places. You know, which is fine. I mean, I don't feel like I need to be rich, but I do need to be able to pay my, you know, very meager bills every month. Yeah. And I know that's the same for you, and I know that's the same for all of us. And not every reader has to be, you know, part of that support, and not every reader has to do it every month or buy every book or everything like that. But there is a threshold that needs to be met or crossed every month, and it's difficult. It's difficult to make readers aware of that. Even after doing Modest Medusa for over 5 years, and even after, I think I'm pretty vocal with my readers. I think my readers are pretty great and pretty understanding and pretty generous. But every month I meet people, or I talk to people online, and they're like, "But why do you need money? I mean, why are you always asking for money?" And I'm sure for some readers that sounds really obnoxious. It sounds really obnoxious for, you know, every time I post a comic that I also say, "Hey, I have a Patreon, give me money." I read one review of Modest Medusa a few years ago where they said, you know, the primary feature of the comic is that the author is always begging for money. And I think it's difficult because I think it's difficult to inform readers that you need this kind of support. And that's the biggest challenge I think most of us face.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's definitely one of the bigger things. This is why we should invest in our network there, our community. We need to communicate this more. Oh, well, you're asking for a handout. No, I am asking you to pay for the content. I'm not asking for a handout.
Right. Yeah, and that's a difficult thing to convey sometimes, and it's especially difficult because also when you present this content, when you present a webcomic to readers, mostly what they see is the comic, and they don't always see anything else. They don't always see your notes. They don't always see your commentary. And so for a lot of readers, you can be posting your comic, and then right under it, you can be saying, help, I'm starving to death. And if I don't make, $800 this month, I literally am going to get evicted and I can't keep going. And they just might not ever see that. Like a majority of your readers might not ever see that, which is not their fault. And of course, like you said before, we live in a completely shit economy, and we're literally at the point where often giving somebody $2 a month on Patreon is not an option, because you literally, as ridiculous as it sounds, you literally need that $2.
Yes.
Or to put it a better way, we can all probably afford to give $2 to people on Patreon, but it adds up really fast. I have about 20 people I give money to on Patreon. I don't make that much money. You can go to my Patreon and you can literally see how much money I make a month. And there's about 20 people I give money to. And that cuts into my income. And part of me often thinks, shit, if I can do this as poor as I am, why can't other people do it as well? But, the truth of the matter is other people have expenses. A lot of people have way more expenses than I do. A lot of people have children. A lot of people have bills. Not everybody can literally afford to do things. But also, I think there's people out there who can, and it hasn't. And it's not that they're greedy, and it's not that they don't want to, but a lot of times it hasn't occurred to them. It hasn't occurred to them to say, "Oh shit, the $1 I can give this person a month is actually not going to do anything, but it's going to be a drop in the bucket that really does eventually add up."
Yes, exactly. And I think us putting up Patreon paywalls is a very good way to start twisting and changing the webcomics model, because it explains better to the readers than anything else. Hey guys, I'm a person. I'm trying to make a living here. This is a capitalist society. Hello. And we need to make money too. We're the content creators. You like this? Throw us a buck or two. And if you can do that monthly, and if I can get at least 1,000 of you to throw me just a buck, hey, that means I don't have to work a full-time day job, and I can make you more content.
Something I did want to address is that when you linked to Dawn's articles last time we talked about this, I read them and I was really excited about them. But the part of them that terrified me is the part about how when she talks about how you don't have to do regular weekly updates, where you can not do that anymore. Like, that's the approach she took, and that makes a lot of sense to me, and I like that a lot. But it's been so ingrained into me that the very best tool we have for promoting our work and finding new readers and getting our work out there is to produce our work constantly and keep pushing it out there where people can see it. And while that is grueling, it's totally grueling, and the returns are not great. It is, when you literally have nothing else you can do, you can always do that. It's always the one tool we have, and I do think it's a valuable tool. And I think Dawn's right that I think you get to the point where that's not as valuable anymore, or where that's more effort than it's actually. There's not enough return for that effort. But I do also think it's a valuable tool, and I think especially when you're starting out, when you need to build an audience so you can eventually use that audience to, and encourage that audience to buy your stuff and give you money. Being able to produce that work on a regular, I'm just rambling at this point. But yeah, my point is that these methods are all tools, and they're not tools that are going to work for our entire webcomics career. Like, I feel like some of these tools are valuable at the beginning. Some of them are valuable at the middle. One of the best pieces of advice I got early on is that spending a bunch of money doing advertising in your first few months, in your first 6 months, is almost certainly a waste of time. Because I was ready right at the beginning of Modest Medusa to spend not a lot of money, but like $100 on advertising. And I was wisely told that it was kind of pointless because, you know, even if people follow the ads, what they're going to see is just a few strips, and there's just not going to be enough there. There's not going to be enough for them to sink their teeth into.
Yeah, definitely. And see, just to give you another example, to go back to Sarah real quick, I found that what she does is she puts up less than half of the book online, and the rest of it is all strictly for the book.
Right, and that's smart.
Yeah, that's very, very smart. So, anyways, I think overall that putting up that paywall of either Patreon or book form and letting people know from the very beginning, this is what I'm doing, this is where you can find the rest of that content, is the key. I think constantly communicating it and making people realize that I am not a free bitch. That is literally it. We are not free. We are people too. We're creating content we absolutely love. We absolutely want to share it with you. But guys, we need at least $1 a month from, you know, a portion of you to be able to make more of this. And if you want to see more of it, contribute to our Patreons, and you can see it weekly.
Yeah, so, no, yeah, exactly. And I think the other thing that's really important to remember is that there's not just one way to do things, that it's important to try new things. It's important to experiment. It's good to listen to people who have had success and see what worked for them, but don't dismiss what they're saying, but also don't adhere to it like a religion, like it's the only path. Try new things, find what works for you and what works for your audience.
Yeah, definitely. All right, guys, we're going to go ahead and wrap it up there. Thank you so much for joining me, Jake. I appreciate it. Yeah,
thanks for having me.
Hey guys, if you've got any comments, questions, you want to continue the discussion, let us know. You can do it below there in the comment section. You can do it on Facebook, on Twitter. Just look me up, Melony Chitwood. You can look up Jake Richmond under Modest Medusa. Thank you so much, guys. Until next time. Bye.